Thomas wakes up in a dark metal box with no memory of who he is, only a name and a gut-deep confusion. He tumbles out into a strange, sunlit meadow surrounded by a giant stone wall and a group of teenage boys who call themselves the Gladers. Nobody remembers the world outside, nobody knows how they got there, and the only routine they have is the maze. A shifting labyrinth at the edge of their home that opens every morning and closes every night, trapping anyone who stays inside when the doors shut. It's a harsh setup, and Thomas's arrival cracks the surface of the Glade's uneasy order like a stone in a still pond. At first Thomas is mostly a mess of questions. He meets the leaders. Albie, who keeps the peace, Newt, the steady one with real moral weight, Minho, the cocky, fearless runner who maps the maze, and Chuck, the kid with an unbreakable grin who quickly befriends him. The boys each have roles to survive, farmers, cooks, but the runners are the ones who run the maze every day trying to plot an exit. The maze is lethal at night because of the grievers, these grotesque, biomechanical creatures that come out after the doors close. If you get stung, you go through the changing and sometimes return different, sometimes die. It's a world with rules, and Thomas is a rule-ignoring kind of guy. Soon after Thomas arrives, the only other human to appear, a girl, is shoved up from the box, unconscious and clutching one word. She's the last one. Her name is Teresa, and she and Thomas share this eerie telepathic connection. A moment where she says, barely audible, that everything is going to change. Teresa's arrival flips the whole place on its head. The Gladers had thought they were finished being experimented on, and now the rules shift. Thomas is jolted by flashes of memory he shouldn't have, images of injections, of being chosen, of laboratories that feel oddly familiar. It's the first hint that their imprisonment is part of a larger experiment, and that they were not randomly dumped into the Glade. Thomas can't stand being told, no, and not knowing. He watches the runners with that impatient energy and eventually gets himself into the maze at night, making decisions he wasn't supposed to make. This is where the movie pivots from mystery to action. Trapped in the labyrinth with Minho when the doors stay open and night falls, a catastrophic deviation from the Glade's rules. Thomas proves surprising. He's brave, not reckless, and he thinks in ways that actually help Minho find a way back. That night changes everything. After surviving a brush with the grievers, Thomas returns with a new courage and a handful of strange memories from the changing, suggesting he's more connected to the maze and to the people controlling it than anyone else. Thomas's growing bond with Teresa becomes central. They slowly piece together that their memories are missing on purpose. They had volunteered for something and been chosen. When Albie is stung during a griever attack, the panic in the Glade is tangible. The changing strips some boys of their minds or leaves them in comas. Others come back different. The Gladers are terrified and angry, they demand answers. Thomas resists sitting on the sidelines. He wants to be a runner, wants to solve the maze now that he's seen that it's possible to survive in the dark. He pushes, argues, and eventually wins the right to run with Minho. That's a turning point. Thomas stops being passive and starts actively rewriting the rules. A big piece of the mystery is that the maze has geometry and a pattern. The runners had been mapping it for years, but it's always changing. Thomas begins to notice patterns others miss: the center, the griever's hole, the mechanical hum behind the walls. With each run, he pieces the place together, driven by a stubborn need to get people out, not to win some abstract contest. He learns to navigate corridors, to read the maze like a language, and he convinces a growing number that there might be a way to end this. There are tense arguments, especially with Gally, who is all about keeping the old rules and who distrusts Thomas's interference. Gally is pushed into the role of antagonist without ever being cartoonish about it. He genuinely thinks chaos will lead to the deaths of them all. When they finally deduce how the maze's center operates, Thomas and the core group, Minho, Newt, Teresa, and a handful of others, make a break for freedom. The final run is a scramble. Alarms, grievers tearing through, friendships tested. The sequences are pure, pulse-pounding escape cinema. There's improvisation, using ropes, running blind through corridors, trusting tiny snippets of memory, and it's messy in the best way. They reach what looks like the heart of the experiment and access an elevator, which is the movie's reveal mechanism. Up they go, adrenaline still high, and what they find is not a utopia but a wrecked world and a team of people who call themselves WCKD. The moment of stepping into sunlight is not joyful relief so much as a bewildering transition. Outside, the planet is scorched and broken. The civilization they might have known has collapsed under a disease called the flare. And then there's the moral sucker punch. WCKD's representatives, scientists in lab coats, not monsters, inform them that everything they endured was an experiment to find a cure. They claim the young people in the maze are immune, and that the trials were the only way to test who could help save humanity. Thomas, who had been pushed and pulled through a life he didn't choose, realizes he was part of a program he once volunteered for. Teresa, who claims to have been part of WCKD's team, has a chilling line: WCKD is good. The line lands with cold ambiguity. The boys are in shock. They've been through physical and psychological torture, and there's no triumphant ending here, only the knowledge that their struggle served someone else's calculation. The human cost is what stops this from feeling like a simple adventure. Chuck, the kid who adopted Thomas as his buddy and who offered small kindnesses in this brutal place, dies in the aftermath of their escape, a loss that Thomas feels to his core. Chuck's death is small and personal in a film that could have been all grand stakes. It reminds us the experiment doesn't end cleanly and that sacrifices were real. Albie's earlier fate, Newt and Minho's trauma, the fractured trust between the Gladers, none of it wraps up neatly. They've escaped one cage and walked straight into a different form of captivity, being informed that their suffering has a utilitarian purpose. Throughout the movie, the relationships matter more than any single action sequence. Thomas's arc is less about being the smartest or strongest and more about insisting on agency in a system that was designed to remove it. Newt provides the moral compass. He's the leader you'd want around in a crisis. Minho is the bravado and frankly the comic relief when things get dark, but he's also the glue in the runner community. Teresa is a complicated figure, ally and possible betrayer, and the film plays her ambiguity well. Gally is the antagonist whose fear makes him cruel, and Chuck is the literal heart. Those dynamics make the maze feel human, not just clever set design. There are clear themes here: the ethics of scientific experimentation, the loss of childhood to supposed higher causes, and the idea that systems that call themselves saviors can be monstrous. The movie doesn't preach so much as it shows. These kids have been used as data points. WCKD's neat lines and sterile control rooms hide the human wreckage. Thomas's growing anger and refusal to be passive is the movie's resistance, a reminder that people aren't just statistics even if an entire organization treats them that way. The Maze Runner is paced like a good roller coaster: slow burn mystery, then escalating set pieces, then a bleak but open-ended conclusion. It borrows from classic dystopias, kids trapped in a constructed world, very Orwellian, but it keeps the focus tight on a single boy learning who he is. The visuals match the tone. The glade is pastoral and slightly idyllic until you look closer, the maze is oppressive and mechanical, and the outside world is stark and ruined. The film balances character beats with action so that you care about the people doing the running when the corridors start to close. If you walk away from it remembering a few images, it'll be the dark metallic box, Thomas's first terrified steps, the maze's walls sliding shut like jaws, and the quiet, awful reveal of the scorched landscape and the word WCKD on a clipboard. Those images carry the emotional weight because the movie invests in its characters long enough for their fate to matter. It's not a perfect movie. It glosses over some logistics and intentionally leaves a lot unanswered, but that's also part of the point. It sets up a bigger story about who gets to decide the fate of humanity and what it costs to find a cure. By the end, Thomas isn't a neat hero. He's a worn kid who's had his childhood stolen but who refuses to be defined by the people who stole it. He wants answers. More than that, he wants to do something with the truth. The film closes on that ambiguous note, which feels honest. Real-life choices are messy, and the Maze Runner doesn't pretend otherwise. It gives you tension, a mystery with teeth, and a group of characters who, even when betrayed or broken, keep trying to care for each other. And yeah, it's fun to watch the runs. The maze sequences are the kind of physical, sweaty, nail-biting moments that make you root for kids against impossible odds. There's humor too, mostly from Chuck and Minho, little moments of levity that remind you these are teenagers, not stoic archetypes. So that's the ride. A boy with no memory wakes up in a man-made prison, befriends other lost kids, falls into a role he never wanted, discovers the experiment that made him, and ends up out in a ruined world where the people who ran the experiment insist they were doing it for the greater good. It's grim at times, hopeful at others, and driven by the idea that survival is about more than living. It's about choosing who you want to be after you've been chosen for something you didn't consent to. Not a bad setup for a first film. It leaves you wanting to know what comes next, which, for better or worse, is exactly what it intends. And that's the terrifying story of The Maze Runner. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more movie recaps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.